We have had a bunch of clues and hidden details dropped in Silo Season 3, Episode 2. Everything from how the memory suppression works, all the way to the age of the silos themselves. Just like before, I'm going to go through it scene by scene and break it all down, and then theorise as to what could be coming next. I'm going to start with all the events in Silo 18, and then I'm going to discuss the before times. There'll be chapters on the scroll bar below, should you want to jump to different points. The episode starts again in Jules' apartment. She's in the process of burning the note, but she can't get it done in time. There's a knock at the door, and we find out that it's Camille. On her way home, she thought she would stop by and congratulate Juliet for the council meeting today. Now, we can assume that Camille was being genuine here and she did just stop by on her way home. Or it could be she was alerted to this because they have cameras in Jules' apartment. The voice decides that the note isn't the issue. What the actual problem is that Juliet is willing to keep something from Camille. Camille explains that Jules has been on these pills now for 3 months, when the voice originally said it was going to be 1, maybe 2 at most. You can see she's having all these internal conflicts. She wants to do the right thing. It's her duty to save Silo 18 and she's now in control of it all, but things aren't going the way it's supposed to be. We then get arguably one of the most important pieces of information from this episode. The algorithm tells us that they have 352 years of data. We also learn that on 6 other occasions, silos have had to implement this memory suppression. One even in Silo 18 over 140 years ago. But this wasn't just individual memory suppression. This is resetting the memory of entire silos. We now have concrete proof that Silo 18 at some point has had something in the water that has affected all the citizens of it and made them lose their memory. The algorithm finishes by saying that Camille just needs to buckle up and carry on what she's doing, continue the medication, increase her security detail, and basically work her way into Juliet's psyche even further. Alright, our next scene in Silo 18 is with Billings. There's a knock on the door and we see a character frantically asking for help because someone is missing. We find out that person is Orla Kent, and the woman who has come to Billings for help is her sister. The concerning part for us is at the end of episode 1, we heard Orla say that she was just off to investigate something. She's gone to look into that, and now she hasn't come back. Billings sends a direct message to Carla saying that if you see Orla, she needs to get in touch with her sister. Because the note didn't fully burn, Jules starts analysing the handwriting. We can see a note that we can presume is from possibly Camille, as it's discussing the council meeting, and we see that she's kept another one. She starts getting flashbacks of Shirley coming to visit her when she was getting ready to go outside, and yet again she remembers the words from Martha, "They are good in supply." With a surge of curiosity, she heads out the apartment and works her way down to speak to Shirley, who we know is usually quite emotionally cut off and doesn't want to deal with things, so she asks somebody else to cover her while she basically goes and hides. If Jules actually wants to head down to speak to Martha, she's going to have to use this conveyor belt system, and everyone's way too hesitant to let the mayor sit in this rather conky contraption. After Knox walks over and Jules explains why she wants to go down, Knox tells us that Martha has had to go down to medical to collect some supplies and that she'll be back up in a minute. Knox uses this opportunity, however, to speak to her about something very important. It was very weird to see this character speaking to someone that knows who she is, but she has no idea who they are. It was also quite interesting how these subconscious emotions kind of come out. Jules and Knox are both very headstrong people and didn't always see eye to eye. But beyond that, there was always a mutual respect for each other. Even now, when Jules has no idea who he really is, you can see she respects him, and also you can see she knows how to trust him. Even though her mind isn't there, her gut instinct is, and this is also something that Martha picks up on as well. When Jules the other day was talking about Bernard, it triggered something for Shirley. She remembered Lukas Kyle, a man who simply claimed to be Bernard's shadow. Lukas had said that when Jules went over the hill when she was outside, someone had seen you go in somewhere. We know this was Bernard looking through the camera in the helmet. We also know that Lukas Kyle went down to what they're calling the digger void. He spoke to that voice at the door. Knox is encouraging Jules to follow this line of thinking. Jules asks, why wouldn't Shirley just talk to me? And Knox has to painfully explain it to her. When Jules came back inside, Shirley camped outside the hospital for 10 days, just hoping to get a glimpse of Jules or be able to speak to her. When Jules had her first kind of meeting in the cafeteria, Apparently she completely stared through Shirley, because of course she didn't recognise her. Shirley from that moment on has then become completely emotionally cut off. I think Shirley to some degree would rather believe that Jules is dead, or at least some part of her is dead, the part that she once knew, rather than that Jules has become everything Shirley hates. In this moment, Martha arrives. This is a very sweet scene, just seeing her walk up, Jules almost slightly nervous. There's something very uncanny here, although these characters are in two very, very different phases of their lives from what we've seen previously, they're kind of both exactly the same. I think somewhere in the back of Jules's mind she recognises Martha even if she doesn't realise it. Jules asks, "Why did I spend so much time with you?" Essentially, why did I come down to your workshop? And Martha jokingly explains that, "Jules, you came down here for advice, but you just never took it." Of course, we know that Jules essentially came down there because she was running away. It was after her mum had committed suicide, and obviously there was also the loss of her brother. They sit down in the cafeteria, and Martha asks, "Why did you want to see me?" Jules explains that she received a note. She asks if Martha was the person who sent it. Martha says, "No, it wasn't me, but what did it say?" Jules freezes up, because in this moment she's still trying to figure out whether or not she can trust her. Martha is very clever and she's trying to kind of probe into Jules's brain here and be like, "So why do you trust me enough to talk to me?" You know, she's kind of like pulling at the strings a little bit. Jules explains that she remembers what Martha did. She sent the note about the heat tape and how it was swapped out. And Martha, I think in that moment, is quite shocked that Jules even remembers this. Jules continues to explain that you were willing to risk your life for this. They could send you out to clean. You only really do that for someone that you, and then it kind of cuts off. But you can see that, you know, doing something like that you would only ever do for someone that you love. Jules must have meant a lot to Martha at some point in time, and she's trying to figure out to what degree these two were connected in one way or another. I think this next bit is my favourite line from the episode. Martha completely shifts the conversation and says, "You know what the most annoying thing about you was?" And it's very sweet because it's kind of the two of them are back being themselves again. She explains how whenever Juliet would ask for advice, it didn't really matter what anyone said because she would go and do the opposite anyway. But what was the most annoying part is that usually Jules was right. She's trying to express to her that you don't need to come and ask people for these answers. You don't necessarily need to inquire with everyone around you. Basically, follow your instinct, be brave, and try a bit harder. It's blunt and it's harsh, but it's sort of the kind of conversation that Jules responds to quite well, I think. Although a very small detail, it's quite interesting here what Martha also puts down on the table. She lays down a Swiss Army knife. This is a tool of Jules. This is something that she would be familiar with. And she's basically trying to trigger something here for Juliet. We'll also learn from a crucial character in the episode that physical objects or relics for these people help trigger these memories. And it's very interesting to me that Martha knows how to do that. In one of the next scenes, with her security, we see that Jules works her way down there. The same fans that we saw in the cafeteria are kind of gawking at her, and you can see she's really uncomfortable. She's almost sort of regretting all this, and she realises that she needs to get away from the security. This poor guy has to put up with Jules basically making a scene, and everyone starts attacking him while she can sneak off. I actually feel really sorry for him here, the poor guy. Jules is basically taken aside by somebody in a judicial uniform. This is where we see Sandy again. She encourages Jules to follow her and then is taken to a room with Patrick Kennedy in it. These were the guys that helped work with Jules on the hard drive. Remember the one that George had way back in season 1. Patrick very bluntly says to Jules, "Why are you lying about the outside?" She says, "I'm not lying about the outside." And there is just this actually quite funny back and forth between all the characters. Remember, Danny and Patrick saw the CGI footage where everything is lush and green, which is what any of the people that are sent out to clean see through their helmets. Then Patrick very cleverly works out that Jules must have an advanced level of memory loss, more than what people are saying. He says, "Do you remember I told you about Sims basically offering me these pills and that I would forget everything?" Which he at the time thought wasn't true and couldn't possibly be real. Now I remember Sims had offered them to him back in season 2. He confronts her and says, "You know, let me guess, you're taking pills right now, you're getting a lot of medical attention." And I think the penny actually drops there and then for Jules. One of Jules's crazed fans is willing to rat out where they took her, and she explains this to Camille and Billings, who at this point have made their way down. They explain to Jules that the helmet they stole from IT the other day has a number 18 in it. The helmet that she wore back when she came in from being outside has a number 17 in it. In fragments, she starts to remember Solo, the other Silo, and other little bits of memory sneaks its way in there as well. She says, when you came back, you held up a note, and I know that on that note, it was not your handwriting. Someone else must have wrote it for you. This is where we get another big reveal. We finally learn who had damaged their wrist in the IT break-in. It's Kathleen Billings. We also learn that Patrick Kennedy and his little group are on the hunt for Lukas Kyle. Jules is confused and they explain that she showed him a red level relic. He didn't tell on her and that's why he was sent down there. Bernard, however, pulled him out of the mines and now he's completely missing. At this point, the cavalry's here and they throw Juliet out of there. Camille has hold of Juliet and they walk her away. They go inside, see that it's completely empty, and they basically prise open this kind of hidden door to reveal a small tunnel system to show how Patrick Kennedy has escaped. Camille asked what Patrick Kennedy said to her. She said he didn't say anything other than, why are you not telling people it's safe to go outside and that you need to tell the truth? Of course, we know that she's learnt a little bit more from that, but she's still keeping things from Camille. There's also a funny scene here where Jules has to meet one of her fans, and it's just quite funny to me how Jules doesn't want to be in the limelight at all. She hates all of this, but she's trying to put on a brave face the best she can. I think it's really hard for her to see people in the silo kind of idolise Jules and they're almost trying to turn themselves into her. Jules, clearly fed up, says, do you even know what that tattoo means? And she basically says no, and Jules says, yeah, I don't know what it means either. You've basically just got marks on your body that mean nothing. And I think to some degree there, that reminds her that she's got burn marks all over her body. It's not just about the tattoos. She's got this scarring of what she's gone through, and yet she can't remember anything really before that event. Evelyn actually, in a quite heartfelt way, explains that, okay, maybe the tattoos don't mean anything to you, but you are someone that proved that you went outside and come back in alive. Even if they don't mean anything to you now, they actually mean something to us. Her poor bodyguard, who's probably had a nightmare of an afternoon, is very angry at Jules for creating a scene there. He basically says, don't treat me like that. I would have never done something like that to you. And then he says, if you want some time away, if you want some space, just tell me. He's feeling some level of guilt that they're kind of treating her like a prisoner and watching her every move. She says, what about Camille? And he says, don't worry about Camille. You're my mare. It's a very, very small detail, but it shows here that not only him, Evelyn, the super fan of Jules, and probably plenty of other people, are going to side with the mare. She is someone who has come all the way down from mechanical. She's then become the sheriff, and now she's become the mayor. She is a person of the people who is now in a position of power. One of the final scenes here from the silo is Billings walking in on Kathleen, rebandaging her wrist. He would have been figuring things out some time ago, and he's confronting her about what she's doing here in terms of working with Patrick Kennedy. He's saying, don't break into IT, don't essentially kidnap the mayor, and don't get yourself involved in all this. The argument ends quite abruptly here. Billings gets a message that says, there are still no eyes on Orla Kent. Jules is basically having her vitals taken, and it's time to take even more medication for the day. You see the amount of pills has gone from 2 to 4. She puts them in her hand and goes to swallow them. The minute that she's left, Jules gets up, quickly spits them out into the sink, and runs some water to kind of wash them down. She then says, I'm hungry, and I want to go to the cafeteria. She holds up this W sign to sort of mark the constellation in front of her, and she gets a memory of being sat there with Lukas Kyle. However, the nurse has snuck back into Juliet's apartment. She lights a match, takes a knife, and starts fishing around to see what could have possibly gone down the sink. That's where she finds one of the capsules, and she works out that Jules didn't take her medication. Camille actually feels confident with how the day has played out. She feels that Jules is back on track as she's coming clean about some information, and she feels that the trust is back on her side. The algorithm explains that when Jules returns, the concept of her survival wasn't what the AI would have wanted. But when people were overjoyed to see her, there was a shift in this narrative. And actually it's had a beneficial effect on the silo. There is a soothing line, basically a good line showing that Jules being mayor has had a positive effect. And then there is a red line showing, I suppose, turmoil, chaos and concern from the people within the silo. The algorithm explains that actually if those lines cross, Juliet's survival and mortality is of no interest to them. What we then get hints about is actually a mass memory suppression. Not just one of an individual. We see them lugging up these barrels of memory suppressant all the way up the main stairwell. This is what Orla was suspicious of at the end of last episode. The question is now, what has Orla found? And who has kidnapped her or killed her or done something else to stop her from getting that word out? Our first scene of this episode from the before times is Charles and Daniel are sat at the hospital. He's showing her a picture of their childhood home, trying to trigger some memories. He explains their parents' names to her, and also in another scene we find out their parents died when they were very young and they actually moved in with their aunt. It's a very sad scene. Charles is really looking at him like he's a complete stranger, because to her he is that. She even calls him Donald, the complete wrong name, and you can just see he doesn't really know what to do. Daniel, completely depleted, takes a break and goes to get a coffee. We then meet a very, very crucial character. This is where we're introduced to Viktor Crnkovich, the reason that Charlotte currently has no memory. What we learn is it is essentially like a drawbridge. It's basically creating a barrier between the top half and the psyche and the bottom half, which is her body and her physical being. Used for too long, this becomes a direct problem. Those memories are gone and you can't bring them back. I think that's almost what we've seen happen to Gloria and rumours of some other characters as well. But in a short-term format, which is what he suggests is going to happen here for Charlotte, is they're basically able to then start reintroducing and rebuilding her memory. The best thing is physical triggers, items from her life and even her childhood, to start bringing these ideas back. This for me is the most crucial scene in the episode, and at the end, when I'm theorising and showing the parallels, I'm going to explain why I think this. Daniel asks Viktor, how do we get her memories back? And Viktor responds, you tell her a story. He explains the reason humans are different to any other species is not because we have opposable thumbs and large brains, it's that our large brains have the capacity to build story and narrative. He explains that it's down to Daniel to decide what Charlotte relearns about herself, that she's a loving sister, an amazing naval aviator, and that it's on Daniel to decide what she ends up knowing. Daniel eerily asks, can I lie? Is there things that I don't have to tell her, or perhaps things that I can shift the truth of? Viktor laughs it off initially, but he actually says, yes, you could. Because we learn that Daniel and Charlotte's parents died when they were younger, he doesn't have many physical things that can be used as triggers. Daniel is very conflicted about all this. For him, he feels like it's a great burden to be the one to give his own sister her identity back and for her to be able to figure out who she is. And he's in basically a coffee shop discussing this with Anna Thurman. Anna makes a very, very good point. She says, I mean, who are we if we're not the sum of our memories? She makes it clear that she'd like to go and visit Charlotte, and Daniel agrees that would be perfectly okay. Then Helen walks in. Helen Drew is the reporter that we were introduced to at the end of the season 2 finale, when she's sat there having that non-date with Daniel. She's concerned for Charlotte and basically asks what hospital she's staying in. Daniel, not very good at keeping the details to himself, explains that because some strings were pulled, she was moved to a different facility. Helen is actually quite concerned when she hears this, and we start to see a different narrative about Viktor Crnkovich. Helen, who's pretty clued up on the details, explains that actually some of his first clinical trials were on basically prisoners from countries that were indebted to the United States. In pretty much all cases, these patients had their memories wiped and actually don't have the capacity to remember anything. They also didn't really even have a say in their treatments, according to Helen. We can see she's baffled why Daniel isn't at least a little bit more concerned as to what's happening with Charlotte. Pretending to be Daniel's assistant, which is actually quite clever, Helen walks away into the hospital to go and speak to Charlotte. A lovely little detail here is she says, maybe we could kind of take her outside, get some fresh air. It must be really disturbing for Charlotte, for people to come to you saying, I'm your brother, I'm your family, and you have no idea who this person is. We learn here that Helen and Charlotte have met before. One rainy day, sat in the car, Charlotte was revealing a bunch of information as Helen was writing it down. This triggers almost like an episode for Charlotte, and I don't think she's ready for all these thoughts to come flooding back. We've seen Jules at this point start to have some memories come back, some form of recognition of herself. But this might be Charlotte's first experience of this. That might be why it triggers almost like a panic attack here. Charlotte is being calmed down by Viktor as Daniel walks in. And there's this weird similarity again. In the same way Camille was trying to calm Jules down, Viktor is doing the same for Charlotte. Daniel confronts Helen and basically says, oh, so you didn't get what you needed from me, so you decided to come here and talk to my sister. And she says, no, you idiot, Charlotte came to me. She was following up because Charlotte was the one that wanted to talk to Helen in the first place. And this is where we get some of the most crucial information of the episode. Charlotte had concerns about the missions to Iran. Charlotte even questioned whether this dirty bomb on DC was even exactly how they said it was. She also explained that the missions that her and her team were on weren't what they seemed to be, and that in some of them not only were the planes stripped of their modern hardware, and I suppose tracking machinery, but they were filled with bunker busters. Basically, a type of bomb that is designed to penetrate the ground. This doesn't all revolve around this idea of the nuke. There was basically another agenda, and Charlotte had figured this out. Helen is pleading with Daniel. You don't find it odd that your sister had all this information? She's the only one of her squadron left alive, and now someone is deliberately suppressing her memory. An amazing parallel between Patrick Kennedy explaining things to Jules. We now have Helen explaining things to Daniel, just in two completely different periods of time. Two characters with memory suppression for deliberate reasons. There is a lot of things packed into this episode, and there is a lot of stuff I could break down and go over. I'm someone who hasn't read the books, and I don't intend to until I've finished the show, as I want all this to be somewhat of a surprise to me. However, here's what I can currently see being put together. At the beginning of the episode, we heard there has been somewhat of a mass memory reset in Silo 18, around about 145 years ago, and this is what needs to happen again. My memory's a bit iffy, a bit like Jules, but my memory's a bit iffy on season 2, and I couldn't quite remember the timelines. Was the whole situation with Salvador Quinn and him wanting to go outside, was that around the same time? And was this a memory reset that happened directly because of his actions? Also, if they're putting these things into the main water supply, does that mean that this happens to everybody in terms of a memory reset? Or do people like Camille Sims and Robert Sims, do they have a different water supply that they drink from? Does the algorithm eventually convince these guys, these people in power, to lose their memory as well? Or is it just the other civilians of the silo? We can see here as well, Camille is frustrated, and the algorithm itself notices that. It says your frustration is noted. This algorithm has very, very weird human quality to it. I know that it's probably just some sort of computer code, language learning model, however you want to look at it, but it does contain some eerie level of human understanding. Well, is this some computer code that was made as of right now in our current time? Or has this been advanced and worked on over hundreds of years? Now, there's something important that I want to touch upon here. All the way back from season 1, we've had this idea of the founders, the people that made the silos. Last episode we had hints that Daniel is somehow the creator of a drill, one that can work way underground without disturbing the ground on top. Now we learn Viktor Crnkovich, this new character we've been introduced to, has the capacity to suppress memory. I'm wondering if right now, when they're sat on this bench here at this medical clinic, are we looking at two of the founders of the silos? When you look at the algorithm and how it perceives humans, it's very mathematical and it's very analytical. It has this constant idea that you need to shift the narrative. You need to give these people that are stuck in these silos stories that they need to believe in and rules they need to follow. Well, this is exactly his principle. You suppress people's memories, you give them a new narrative and a new story, they believe it and they don't question it. I'm wondering if in this scene we are looking at the founders of the silos themselves. Daniel being somewhat of the mechanical or engineer-minded, and Viktor Crnkovich showing similarities to that of Bernard. Someone who is very mathematically driven, someone who wants to focus on analytics and study the psychology of people. You have mechanical, you have supply, you have medical, you have all these different groups. And I'm wondering if we're seeing the original versions of those. Another reason that's driving this for me, although it could be nothing, is the fact that directly after showing him, Viktor Crnkovich, it cuts directly to Billings looking at the pact itself. My main question here is, did Daniel Keene or Viktor Crnkovich write the pact or anything of the original texts from the founders? There's some other interesting things I noticed in terms of parallels from this episode. Whenever there is major truth that is revealed, it is directly referring to the outside. Not just the outside in terms of going out to clean, but also in the before times, any truth that is revealed is outside. Whether it's Daniel and Viktor sat on that bench discussing who they are as individuals, what is humanity except the stories that we tell ourselves, all the way to when Helen takes Charlotte outside for some fresh air. When Jules is able to get out of her apartment, which is her confined space, and she makes it in her mind outside of where she's normally able to go, she starts getting the truth. In this episode, wherever some truth is revealed, it is directly dependent on the character being outside of where they would usually be. For Jules, it's being outside of her apartment, and for Charlotte, it's being outside of her hospital bed. Another little detail that I loved within this episode is the concept of handwriting and identity. We see Jules sat there at the beginning of the episode looking at these notes, the one that she kept before she went out to clean. And then, of course, Sandy being able to figure things out too. She directly worked for Jules. She knows Jules' handwriting, and she knows that Jules didn't write that note. Helen sat outside with Charlotte looking at the notes that she wrote herself about the information and the truth that Charlotte was trying to reveal to her. You could even look at the tattoos on Jules' skin. The idea of messages, handwriting, actual written identity being constantly woven through the episode and people trying to put the pieces together. It's something I didn't notice until my second watching of it, but it's a detail I actually really appreciate now that I have recognised it. My questions that I have right now heading into episode 3 is 1, if they are now putting things in the water supply, how long is this going to take? Secondly, where is Orla Kent? Is she alive? Is she dead? Is she being questioned by someone? Thirdly, and this was something that I noticed at the end of watching this for the first time, we didn't see Robert Sims at all, not for a single second, in this entire episode. Is it something to do with Bernard? Is it something to do with Orla? Or something else entirely? Now that Jules has more memories coming back, she's slowly beginning to remember Solo and the other Silo, Silo 17, what is she going to want to try and do? And I suppose my final thought is, if Helen said that Charlotte came directly to her because she was concerned about these missions to Iran, what is Daniel going to do with that? Is he going to begin to trust Viktor Crnkovich and want to be more involved in Charlotte's recovery? Or is he going to partner up with Helen and try and get the truth out of Charlotte, however painful that's going to be? These people are clueless. They don't have all the information. They don't have everything they need. But they're able to slowly weave this web together, even if it doesn't have all the details. They have no access to the vault, the algorithm. They can't go and look in the legacy room. They can't get access to all these relics. Just with gut instinct and I suppose human intelligence, they're able to put these things together. Whether it be Jules or Charlotte or Helen or even the likes of Patrick Kennedy and Billings and a bunch of other people, they will find the truth at whatever the cost. And as an audience member, I'm very excited to see how that occurs. I do hope you're enjoying these analysis vids. They take me a while. I sit here for a long time and just ramble and let my thoughts kind of flow, and then I package it all up in a way that's hopefully easy for you to understand. So if you do enjoy this, giving it a thumbs up really helps me out, and if you do feel like it, you can hype the video. That basically pushes it further on the algorithm and allows me to grow as a creator. Click subscribe and turn your notifications on, and that way you won't miss any more videos from me, and I'll see you next time for episode 3. Toodles!